Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to make my maiden speech. It's the first time I've ever been called a maiden, and it seems a little unusual as my children watch me from the gallery, and I can assure everybody here that it is very good that they are behind the glass. I am exceptionally proud to... I can see them talking up there. I'm exceptionally proud to be one of the new women MPs elected to this Parliament, and also exceptionally proud to be one of the working parents elected to this Parliament. I think that we have an awful lot to offer when deciding what is best for our country, and something that hasn't always been the case. Like my predecessor, John Hemming, my roots in Birmingham Yardley run very deep. I know on reading his maiden speech that this was a source of great pride for him, and I feel the same. I think that in this chamber, a Brummie accent is a very rare thing, and I look forward to changing that. Like so many Brummies, my nan and grandad, from both my mother and father's side, moved from Birmingham's Peaky Blinders famed inner-city industrial areas in Small Heath, Ladywood and Winson Green. They moved to the newly built estates of Yardley and Sheldon in the 30s and 40s. They were proud of their new homes, and they raised all their children there. My family benefited from decent council houses and good communities. And during my campaign, I was proud to knock on the doors of 3 different houses where my parents had lived, on Garrett's Green Lane, Froddersley Road and Glen Eagles Road. During the campaign, I also visited the Yardley Great Trust, a charity whose history in the area is even longer than mine. Originating in the 14th century, the Yardley Great Trust has helped to alleviate poverty and support residents in their sickness and old age, and it continues to do so today. In 1966, the Yardley Great Trust gave my mum a grant to help poor local kids stay in education, in order that she would not leave school before doing her A-levels, to help her single mother with the housekeeping. She went on to achieve a great many things, and give me and my brothers a good life and lots of opportunities. Birmingham Yardley was good to my family, and I very much plan to repay this debt. I requested to make my maiden speech in this section of the Queen's Speech debates because, along with all things Birmingham Yardley, I am deeply committed to improving our country's response to victims of domestic and sexual violence and abuse in all its forms. Having worked for years in a service that operated refuges, rape crisis, child sexual exploitation services and human trafficking services, I know that we need to do more. We need to look no further than the poor rape conviction rates to know that for very vulnerable victims, our justice system is too often just another establishment that has failed to protect them. For years before I sat on these green benches, and I'm sure for many more after, there will have been calls for government departments to work better together and understand the multiple and layered effects our decisions have on people's lives. I can think of no better example of this than the interaction between the Department for Work and Pensions and our Justice and Home Affairs departments. I have no doubt that the Home Secretary is committed to ending child sexual exploitation. And it is true to say that her department have invested in improving services for victims of sexual violence. However, as a government, it is no good to give with one hand and take away with another. This government's rumoured plans to remove housing benefit from people aged under 21 will be disastrous for these very vulnerable victims. Whilst I do not agree with this measure at all, I compel the government to remove vulnerable people in supported accommodation from this new legislation. To make my point, I shall tell the story of Helen. Helen was an 18-year-old girl I met in my first week at my old job, and she has stayed with me for the last 6 years. She had been abused by her father as a child and had been in and out of local authority care throughout her so-called childhood. Between 15 and 18, Helen was exploited by one boyfriend or another, all much older than her, none with her best interests at heart. Helen had come to our services to get support for her abuse and was being supported by an independent sexual violence advisor to help give statements to the police and seek conviction and justice for her childhood abuse. But following the breakdown of her relationship with her mother and then her grandmother after that, she became homeless and her life was difficult and chaotic. Without a stable living environment, she fell again to those who abused her and fell out of the justice system. Eventually, after cycles of absconding and returning, we were able to secure Helen supported living, and I remember personally driving her to my now constituency of Birmingham Yardley to take her to St Basil's, a brilliant youth homelessness charity. With the aid of housing benefit and the home she was given, she was able to learn to look after herself, and with support, seek justice in order to move on with her life and make a future. Where would Helen go now in the future that doesn't give her housing benefit? How many A&E visits will she make in this Parliament? How many custody suites will she block up? How many police reports will be filed for Helen by a stretched force? Worse still, how many other people will be abused by those who abused Helen when justice is not done? If this is not enough to alarm the Justice and Home Affairs teams opposite me, perhaps I will put it differently. How much is this going to cost your departments? In the last Parliament, the domestic violence lobby was able to have victims living in refuge removed from the universal credit and the benefits cap. Although an afterthought, this was the right decision of the government to keep women and children safe. I urge this government not to make the same mistake of making the most vulnerable young people an afterthought. I compel the government to exempt young people at risk of homelessness and those in supported accommodation from this welfare reform. In Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid refuges alone last year, 25% of the victims who lived there were 18 to 21. We must protect these victims. Justice and security does not end in its defined government departments. In my constituency, there are lots of Helens, and it is my job to amplify their stories so we stop finding it easy to look away. I will never look away. And I thank Mr Deputy Speaker for this chance to tell their story, and I look forward to telling many more.